Welcome to our training session. My name is Matthew Moore, and I am the Fiscal Manager for the Ohio Department of Education Office for Child Nutrition. Today, I will discuss requirements and best practices for procuring non-food goods and services in the National School Lunch Program. Any procurement in a child nutrition program must follow the same basic guidelines. The Uniform Guidance at 2 CFR Part 200 contains general procurement regulations for all federal grant programs. One of these requirements is for each program sponsor to have documented procurement policies and procedures, including a code of conduct. The code of conduct must address conflicts of interest and must define disciplinary actions to be taken if an employee violates the code. The regulations also require you to maintain records of the procurement process. These regulations are put in place to ensure full and open competition, eliminate conflicts of interest, and ensure that federal dollars are spent only on allowable program costs. Additionally, the regulations encourage the use of small, minority-owned, and women-owned businesses when possible. The National School Lunch Program does have some special provisions that apply to procurement. NSLP procurement regulations are found in 7 CFR Part 210. Everyone should already be familiar with Buy American and Geographic Preference. We will not be discussing these today. The Buy American requirement and Geographic Preference only apply to food purchases. There is no requirement to buy American with equipment, and there is no option to apply a Geographic Preference. There is one consideration for non-food purchases, however: prior written approval. Schools must get prior approval from the state agency before incurring certain costs. These costs are outlined in the Uniform Guidance. Before we look at the most common examples, let's talk about what prior written approval means. Prior means before. If the state agency does not approve the cost before it is incurred, the cost may be unallowable, meaning it cannot be paid from the nonprofit school food service account. We handle these approvals in writing for two reasons. First, if you can't clearly explain what the expense is and why it is necessary for the program, then it probably isn't an allowable cost in the first place. Second, keeping everything in writing provides a record of our approval in case the cost is questioned during an audit or other review. In some cases, we may only approve part of your request. For example, if you request to pay for a cafeteria renovation using funds from the nonprofit school food service account, but the cafeteria space is shared with other activities within the school, we will only approve an amount proportional to the National School Lunch Program usage. These are the most common costs in the National School Lunch Program that require prior approval, and the section of the Uniform Guidance that covers each. I'll go over each of these in more detail. The Uniform Guidance defines equipment for the purposes of federal grants. If your district has established a capitalization threshold lower than $5,000 for the purposes of financial reporting, the lower threshold applies when determining whether an item qualifies as equipment. The USDA recognizes that the purchase of equipment is frequently a necessary cost for the National School Lunch Program. It's hard to prepare and serve meals without equipment. Because of this, the USDA issued a policy allowing each state agency to establish a list of pre-approved equipment. Ohio issued its list of pre-approved equipment with an accompanying policy on June 1, 2018. The policy outlines when schools can purchase equipment without prior approval and when they must still seek approval from the state agency. Severance pay always requires prior approval. If severance pay is not required by an employment contract or written policy, it is unlikely to be an allowable cost. Membership in a professional organization, such as the School Nutrition Association, does not require prior approval. Membership in a community organization, such as Friends of the Downtown Library, does require prior approval. This type of membership will only be approved if you can clearly demonstrate how the membership benefits the National School Lunch Program. The last common cost we will discuss is travel. This includes all costs related to travel, whether the LEA pays for the costs directly or reimburses an employee. All travel costs must be consistent with the LEA's policies. For the National School Lunch Program, you do not need prior approval for travel costs necessary for direct program operations. Travel costs related to training that is dedicated to child nutrition programs also do not require prior approval. If an employee's travel serves multiple purposes and is not dedicated solely to child nutrition programs, you must get prior approval for the travel costs. This will allow us to determine what portion of the costs benefit child nutrition programs versus other programs. Additionally, any travel costs that would not normally be paid under existing policies require prior approval. Generally, you cannot charge costs to a federal grant that are not consistent with costs charged to other activities. Next, I will discuss the procurement methods allowed under the federal regulations. I'll start with an overview of formal and informal procurements, and then discuss the different allowable methods of procurement. In the federal regulations, procurement is generally divided into two types: informal and formal. These are separated by the simplified acquisition threshold, currently set at $150,000. Any procurement with a value greater than the simplified acquisition threshold must use a formal procurement method. As I covered at the beginning of the presentation, LEAs are required to have their own documented procurement policies and procedures. These procedures may set lower thresholds or impose additional requirements. When we conduct program reviews, we will not only ensure that your procedures comply with the regulatory requirements, we will also make sure that you followed your own procedures. Remember, when comparing the federal regulations and your policies, the lowest or most restrictive threshold always applies. For an informal procurement, there are two allowed methods: micropurchases and small purchase procedures. For purchases less than the federal micropurchase threshold, currently set at $3,500, there is no requirement to solicit quotes or otherwise advertise the opportunity. Micropurchases can be used to fill immediate needs when there isn't time for a full procurement process, or one-time purchases where the time and effort spent on a procurement process would outweigh any potential savings. Micropurchases should generally not be used when the same product or service will be purchased at regular intervals throughout the year. Small purchase procedures can encompass a wide range of procurement scenarios. Responses to a small purchase procurement will be in the form of quotes. Quotes differ from bids in that they are generally negotiable and not binding. There are many ways to obtain quotes depending on what type of product or service you are procuring. Published advertisements, price lists, or websites can be a quick and easy source of quotes for readily available products. For custom products or services, you may benefit from requesting written quotes. This will allow you to provide potential vendors a clear description of your needs and review their responses to ensure that those needs are met. Small purchase awards are generally made to the lowest cost vendor, but you can also consider additional criteria, such as warranties or quality of service. Formal procurements also have two allowed methods: sealed bids and competitive proposals. Which method to use depends on the type of product or service you are procuring. Sealed bids can be used when you can clearly define the characteristics of the desired product or the methods and deliverables of the desired service. Competitive proposals can be used when you want potential vendors to propose methods for service, or if you are purchasing multiple products that will work together as a system. When using sealed bids, you are required to conduct a public bid opening. Publicly opening and announcing the bids provides transparency in the procurement process. You then award the contract to the lowest responsive bid from a responsible bidder. A responsive bid is a bid that meets all of the requirements set forth in your solicitation documents. A responsible bidder is one who has, or can be reasonably expected to obtain, the financial and operational resources necessary to perform the contract, is able to comply with regulatory requirements, is able to deliver according to the contract schedule, and has a history of satisfactory performance. Specifications are the most important part of a procurement using sealed bids. The specifications define the product or service that you want. Specifications should focus on the characteristics, capabilities, and methods of service that you need without referring to brand names or proprietary products or processes. In this example, you can see that the specifications focus on the relevant characteristics of the oven. Providing these criteria to potential vendors will ensure that you get a product that fits your needs. There may be times when specifying a brand name or equivalent is allowable. For example, if your maintenance staff is trained to repair a particular brand of ovens, and you maintain a supply of common replacement parts, that could justify purchasing additional ovens of the same brand. Even in this case, however, you should still allow potential vendors to propose equivalent products. You should include the process to establish an equivalent product in your solicitation documents. This process could require the potential vendor to submit information on additional required training or interoperability of replacement parts. In this example, we still define the key characteristics for the oven, but add the brand name or equivalent information at the end. Remember, the main focus of specifications should always be on the characteristics. If you need to procure goods or services that either do not have clearly defined specifications or where there may be many different options to meet your needs, you should consider using competitive proposals. With this procurement method, you outline an end goal or set of deliverables, but allow the vendor to propose the methods and/or products to achieve that goal. Instead of awarding the contract to the lowest bid, you evaluate each proposal against a set of criteria and award the contract to the highest overall score. There is no public opening for competitive proposals, since cost is only one of many factors that will determine the award. The evaluation criteria are the most important part of a procurement using competitive proposals. A potential vendor can use your evaluation criteria as a checklist to make sure their proposal contains all of the information that you requested. This is one example of improving a criterion that is too vague. Just asking for references doesn't provide much guidance to the vendor and may result in receiving references from projects that are not comparable. Including the additional characteristics in your criteria will help you see how the vendor has worked with similar situations. In this example, instead of asking for general compatibility, it is better to specifically list the systems that you expect the vendor to interface with. Again, this helps to ensure that you get information that is relevant to your operation and will be helpful in the scoring process. Some LEAs join group purchasing organizations, also known as GPOs, or enter into other cooperative purchasing agreements in order to obtain more favorable pricing based on the increased purchasing volume of the organization. While there can be benefits to entering into this type of agreement, there are several points to keep in mind to ensure you stay in compliance with the regulations. The final responsibility for complying with program regulations always lies with the LEA. It is your responsibility to ensure that any procurement transactions undertaken by a cooperative organization on your behalf are conducted properly. No matter what method you use, all procurements should follow the same basic process. First, determine exactly what you need. Then, use that need to determine the most appropriate procurement method based on the value and types of goods or services. Develop a list of clear specifications to communicate your need to potential vendors. Contact sources for quotes or advertise publicly to solicit bids or proposals. Finally, award the contract and continue to manage it to ensure that you receive exactly the goods or services that you specified. If you have any questions, contact your assigned education program specialist. If you don't know who your assigned education program specialist is, please call our general office number.